Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and we have guest John Moore with us. He is a Green Beret that actually fought in Vietnam all the way back in the late 60s. Since then, he has worked with many alphabet agencies as a homicide detective and is very knowledgeable on several topics that we are going to discuss here today. First thing we're going to talk about is the insider information he got on Planet X many years ago and what a lot of people that were in the military did to prepare for the possible cataclysms of a planetary body that gets close to our own, possibly here within the next several years. So this is going to be a lot of good information. We're going to talk a little bit about politics. We're going to get into the gun control debate and several other issues. And if you'd like to know more about John, check out thelibertyman.com. He also has an awesome radio program at republicbroadcasting.org. His programs are syndicated as well. So check out thelibertyman.com. And John, it's great to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Yeah, good.
I talked to you earlier. You've worked with special forces and other operations. What has that brought to the table for you as far as knowledge on what's really going on behind the scenes that most people aren't aware of?
Well, my career as a homicide detective and private investigator gave me two skill sets that I've developed to a pretty high degree, Rex. The skills of locating and interviewing witnesses. And I make use of those skills a lot. And when it comes to the matter of Planet X, I've done the same thing. The witnesses in this case are primarily veterans of the United States Navy Submarine Corps. There have been other witnesses here and there, but that's the main witnesses, the ones that have given me the most information, the most detailed information. And of course, they were all at the classified briefings that the Navy commenced in 1979. I've tracked it back to one of my listeners. He goes by his stage name is Montana, Phil from Montana. And he was setting up the room where the briefing took place in New Orleans for the admirals on a Saturday morning, the flag rank officers. He says, John, admirals don't do Saturday morning briefings, but he set up the tables, the chairs, the lights, and the sound system. And there was a map on the wall that made no sense to him. He was not allowed to be in the briefing, so he didn't know from 1979 until 2009, 30 years later, what the map and the markings on that map meant. The map that he saw on my DVD duplicates the map that he saw in New Orleans in 1979, a map showing North America with new coastlines, East Coast, West Coast, Gulf Coast, and of course the middle of the country being split by a 100 to 200 mile wide Mississippi River inland sea. So that's where my experience and training comes in, is that those skill sets, and of course keeping up contacts within the military and within military intelligence and with the lettered agencies. When you do criminal investigations, you come into contact with a lot of local, state, and federal law enforcement, Rex. So those contacts have proven to be quite valuable as well.
Oh, I can absolutely agree with you on that. Now, also, those briefings and the map that you're discussing, I've seen leaked images of that map. Whether it was the exact same one or not, I don't know, but it had the river going through the Mississippi like you were talking about. That was about 100 or so miles wide. It had different coastal lines, and that actually overlays quite a bit with the Edgar Cayce map that was that he kind of channeled way back when. And I heard of a lot of people moving to certain locations after that briefing because of what they were told. Did you move when you saw that map, or were you already in a place that was pretty secure?
Well, my home here in south central Missouri was established for other reasons. I have family roots going back here more than 150 years. Grandparents and great-grandparents buried in the local cemeteries. So I was very fortunate and blessed in that regard. I can't take any credit for being here other than this is my ancestral home, I guess you could say. But it worked out really nice for me, as it turns out, that the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks is, in fact, one of the designated safe havens by the U.S. Navy. And as a consequence, Rex, we've had many thousands of Navy veterans and their families move to the Arkansas-Missouri Ozarks when these men retire. Many thousands.
Well, I love it out there, and it seems like Missouri, in my opinion, is one of the most patriotic states that I've ever been to. I mean, I live out here in Texas, and even Texas, at least in San Antonio, doesn't have the same feel as many places in Missouri. Now, obviously, I haven't been to every part of Texas, and I'm sure that I'm already going to get a whole bunch of comments where people are going to say, hey, I live in Texas, and we're super patriotic, and that's fantastic. I applaud you for that. Yeah, it just seems like in places like Branson also, they really push the patriotic theme. I recently went out there, and most of the people that were in Branson were either retired military or Department of Defense of some sort. So it's just really neat to meet that generation. And it's nice to talk to people like you, John, that, you know, you've seen the files, you've talked to the people, inside sources, and you're openly saying, yes, Planet X is real. I've heard that it's against the law, that you could actually get in big trouble for exposing Planet X if you have certain positions in the military. Is that true, or is that just internet hogwash?
Well, in certain positions, of course, you're going to have a security clearance, and you're going to sign non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. If you violate your non-disclosure agreement, you could be prosecuted. Of course, you could. And the non-disclosure agreements can be in the private sector. When it comes to, I've been in any number of meetings where a new product was being discussed that would be manufactured in the future, and I would sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I've been in meetings with FBI agents where I had to sign non-disclosure agreements. So those things do exist, and they are real. And yes, depending on the nature of the non-disclosure agreement and your security clearance, you could in fact be prosecuted if you violate that.
Well, and I've certainly heard of that. However, do you feel that there are people that might have access to certain telescopes or technology where they have clearly seen footage of this Planet X and they're not able to talk about it to somebody like myself or yourself?
That's not going to happen. The way they maintain control is paychecks and pensions and ultimately threats. But usually the paycheck and pension held over their head is enough to have these men and women maintain their silence. Focusing on seeing an image of Planet X is a natural and normal thing to do. I did it 17 years ago. I was so focused on seeing this thing myself that I scheduled time at a private observatory in my ignorance and naivety in the year 2000. Thinking I could go out here in South Central Missouri and look at this thing, not knowing any better, not knowing you couldn't see it from the Northern Hemisphere regardless of your equipment, and even from the extreme Southern Hemisphere, from southern Chile, you could only see it in the infrared light spectrum except for June. The month of June was the one month that you could see it in the visible light spectrum.
How did you get that information, John? And I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, you don't need to apologize. After you've read tens of thousands of pages, I've probably read 20,000 pages about this and related topics, and I've interviewed dozens of men, where the exact source frequently becomes kind of lost in the jumble of where exact information may come from. But that is my information, Rex, is that you can only be seen in the visible light spectrum 1 month a year, and otherwise it's in the infrared light spectrum. So now at some point it'll be visible in the visible light spectrum from the Northern Hemisphere. At that point, Rex, we'll have 30 days or 6 months or so before these matters get so severe that you're not going to be looking up in the sky. You're going to be looking to find something to eat and a clean drink of water, because things will go to hell in a handbasket.
You know, it seems as if the powers that be, those that control the majority of the businesses and politics behind the scenes, whether they're funding them or whatever clout they have, it seems as if they know something is going to happen, because many times things are orchestrated at certain times, and it's like they're creating this big bubble, And I wonder if they've known about this for a long enough time to where they can orchestrate just pillaging the earth as much as possible and using the slave class, you could call it, I guess, or people that are working for these guys to give them these underground bunkers and just unlimited funds to go create whatever they need. So when things do hit the fan, they'll be in a Ritz-Carlton underground, essentially.
Right. Well, the insiders call them hotels, by the way, Rex. And there's dozens of these, possibly hundreds, in the United States. Russia, beginning when I was running for Congress in 1996, we found out that Russia had basically built an underground city in the Ural Mountains. The Cold War had been over for quite a while by then, at least 8 years, 7 or 8 years, and we wondered at the time, why are they spending all this money when the Cold War is over to build this underground city in the Ural Mountains? Norway has built some shelters for their people. China, you've probably seen, I'm sure many of your listeners have seen the vast cities in the extreme western part of China, which basically is desert. Multi-billion-dollar cities with no people in them.
Yeah.
Well, they're being, people get into all these grand theories, but the bottom line is they built these things because they're going to need them. That's why they were built, because they'll need them. The Chinese cities, the American underground shelters, the Russian shelter in the Ural Mountains. The British government has been building shelters in the Scottish Highlands for 20 plus years. The major governments have been taking these precautions for decades, not just the U.S. government. And they're doing these things because they have no choice. They're doing them because they need them. But there's other aspects to this, Rex. There's a spiritual aspect to it. There's financial and economic aspects to it. They've been spending money like drunk sailors for a better part of 30-something years also, 36, 37 years. The consequences of that massive spending are well known. It will ultimately lead to disaster on one hand. On the other, if the consequences no longer matter, why not go ahead and do it, Rex? Which is what they've chosen to do. Unfunded, total U.S. government funded and unfunded liabilities is 17 or 19 trillion dollars, more money than's on the planet. There's no way it could ever possibly be repaid without a dramatic restructuring of some sort, repudiation of the debt, something of that nature. It's just not going to happen. But they continue to add on top of that. Plus, we have all the things going on with the Muslims and the Vatican and so forth. They want to get their shiny new world order fully in place before all hell breaks loose, because they'll be stopped just like the rest of us when these events fully, kick in with the 10th planet, the violently rising ocean levels, the violent climate change, and all the rest of it. We're already seeing the effects, by the way. I'll give you an example here, Rex. The millions of refugees right now, and literally 1 million plus from Syria alone. And they keep saying it's the war, it's the civil war. Well, that's a big part of it, no doubt. What they aren't saying, Rex, is Syria and the Middle East is having the worst drought in 900 years. The agricultural segment of the Syrian economy has been basically destroyed. And that's true of most countries. If the economic sector of any given country is wrecked, that wrecks the rest of the economy. So a large number of these refugees are economic refugees because of the worst drought in 900 years, Rex, which is not being talked about at all in any mass media that I'm aware of. Are you?
No, and also I heard a couple years ago from Dane Wigington that Siberia had the worst drought in a very long time, and that a large portion of Siberia was actually on fire back in 2013 or 2014, and it seems like every year the weather just gets more extreme. I noticed the sun itself is a lot more intense than it was 15 years ago. It's wider, brighter. It doesn't have that yellowish glow to it, except for a little bit during the evening when it starts to set. And when I went out to the McDonald Observatory in Texas out there by Fort Davis recently on the Leak Project tour, I had a chance to talk to the customer relations guy there about Nibiru and chemtrails. And you could tell that that specific area didn't get blasted with chemtrails or even contrails because it's a no-fly zone, and the sun did look different in that area versus being in Phoenix, Arizona, or Las Vegas, where they just blast the skies with these chemicals. It seems as if they're terraforming the planet as well.
Well, let's translate this part of our discussion into something that will help all our listeners. The scientists, it's been about 20 years ago, they developed something called the ultraviolet index, which in the United States goes from 1 to, I believe, 11 or 12. In Europe, I believe it goes to 15, with 15 or 12 being the highest. The EPA, in fact, I got a link on my website at thelibertyman.com. The EPA has a service that they provide that if you go to this service, and like I have the link here on my homepage, you can put in your zip code, and they will give you the ultraviolet index, and I'll do mine, 65456. Put it in there, and up it pops, the ultraviolet index for the day for that zip code, which right now, I guess for Tuesday it's at a 9. Yesterday and the day before it was 11. And they have a listing here of sun protection messages beginning at 2 that says you can safely be outside. 3 to 5, take precautions. 6 to 7, protection if some damage is needed. Once it gets to an 8 and higher, it will burn you through your clothing, Rex. It will literally burn you through a light shirt or a light pair of trousers. This is... I've talked to people about this, and many people will describe how when they go out, when the sun is 8 or 10 or 11, they have this instant tingling feeling on their skin. That's the skin burning almost instantly. The ultraviolet index originally only went to 10. They found out with the extra energy coming at us from the sun, they had to increase it to 11 plus. I'm not sure how high it goes here in the United States, but I believe in Europe it goes to 15. There is actually special clothing that is ultraviolet resistant. I've seen many items of that nature for sale at Amazon.com. Hats, shirts, trousers, so forth. So all your listeners need to be aware of the ultraviolet index. And between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., if you go outside, you really need protection if it's an 8 or higher, or you will get damage to your skin. And if you do it every day, you're setting yourself up for skin cancer, quite frankly.
Now, so are the chemtrails actually blocking part of the radiation from the extreme sun, or possibly suns now, or is it actually doing the opposite?
Well, the scientists I've talked to are in agreement that the chemtrails are a failed, I emphasize, failed attempt to cool down the surface of the planet. They're making artificial clouds, and we all learn in grade school that clouds make the surface of the planet cooler, and you can tell that on any given day. When a cloud moves over, you instantly feel cooler. But that was the original purpose of the chemtrails, and that's still the purpose of the chemtrails. Of course, the things they have in them are very toxic substances that will cause harm to humans and animals both, Rex.
And also the plant life. So if it's a filled, and obviously it's filled because anybody that goes outside can tell immediately. I mean, the sunsets are pretty cool, don't get me wrong, but are they going to just keep doing it because they've been sold this lie, and these companies are just making ginormous amounts of money producing these chemicals that are being blasted in the atmosphere, essentially?
Well, I have no direct information to answer your question. My belief is that they're going to continue, yes.
Yeah, okay. And so you've talked to people that have some very high ranks in the military, and being a homicide detective, you've talked to some people that are very astute and can see things a lot better than most people, probably at a much higher accuracy rating as well, and what they retain information-wise. So what are some other things that you've been told maybe that you could share with our listeners here at the Leak Project about Planet X and precautions that maybe we could take, or time frames to be prepared for this scenario?
Okay, well, that's great. Let's start with time frame first of all. This comes up in conversations all the time. John, when's it going to happen? Well, the only people that are interested in time frames are the ones who aren't prepared. The Navy veterans were given the time frame of in your lifetimes, gentlemen. So when they retire, they buy their 5 or 10 or 40 acres in the Ozarks. They start their hobby farm, start a new career. The average military retiree is 40 to 45 years old, still relatively young people. And they don't need to worry about a date. And in fact, they don't worry about a date, and they're not concerned about a date because their lifestyle and everything they do 7 days a week is all focused on establishing a hobby farm and a safe haven for the people they care about. If you're not doing that every day of your life and you're not part of a hobby farm, then I can see absolutely why you would be focused on a date and a time frame, because you haven't done these things and you aren't doing these things. Living a life like that in anguish and fear is not healthy, it's not good, it's not productive. But in fact, just over the weekend, Rex, I think it was Saturday morning, I was talking to a woman. She just came across this information about the 10th planet 3 weeks ago. And she was, quite frankly, almost out of her mind with fear, thinking that in August or September something dramatic was going to happen. And I spent some time talking to her, basically talking her down off of her level of fear, letting her know that I don't believe anything's going to happen in September or August, that she needs to be focused on establishing a safe haven for her and her family. And get over the fear, stop anguishing over a date or a time frame, and get on with her life. That's what's healthy. That's what's productive. And I know you probably have many, many listeners, Rex, who, in fact, are searching for a date. They're searching for an image. And the reason they're doing that, I'll repeat myself, is they're not living a life of preparedness, a lifestyle of preparedness, which is why this focus and this anxiety is so great within them, Rex.
Well, it's always good to be prepared, and I remember back in 2011 when the Fukushima disaster happened, that really kind of shook me up a little bit because of all the fears of radiation that were on the web. So I went out and picked up a radiation detector built into my watch, actually, so I could walk around and track the levels. And it's weird because the radiation levels in 2013, I didn't pick up the watch for a couple years after the Fukushima disaster, but in San Antonio, the levels would be around 0.06 to 0.08 microsieverts per hour. And actually, those levels have almost doubled on a regular basis out here now. If you walk around in the San Antonio area, they're 0.11, 0.15, 0.16 microsieverts per hour. And I know that's not very high, but in San Antonio, Texas, the fact that it's almost doubled, and it's not just little spikes here and there, it's a regular thing. So I wonder if that could be because of the extra radiation from the sun, or possibly the chemtrails, or do you believe in a binary star system that we are approaching, or do you think that Planet X is just solo?
Well, we are, in fact, binary star systems are more common than not, according to the astronomers I talk to. And we are, in fact, in my opinion, based on the knowledge I've got, part of a binary star system. And the 10th planet has a 3,600-year cycle that it takes to make one complete revolution between the two planets. Everything I'm seeing, everything I'm hearing and reading, it tells me we're near the end of one of those 3,600-year cycles. A friend of mine from Texas, he went by the stage name Lucas. He made a couple of videos. I bought the copyrights from him. And his own independent research of
from
standard
Austin, right?
Austin, that's right.
Okay.
You know Lucas?
Yeah.
Okay. He's back in Texas, by the way. He was in Colorado for a while. Anybody can do this on their own, and we have to thank Dr. Velikovsky for doing something that nobody had done before. Dr. Velikovsky reconciled the ancient calendars. You can't compare events until you reconcile the ancient calendars from one civilization to another. But if you go back about 3,600 years, Rex, you find 5 or 6 major civilizations ended, and 5 or 6 major civilizations began. You go back 7,200 years, same thing. You go back another 3,600 before that, same thing. Once you get back around 12,000 years or so, it starts getting pretty fuzzy in terms of being able to figure out very much. But we have fairly good records for the last 3 cycles of these civilizations being smashed into the mud, being replaced by new civilizations. And it happens on a regular basis, and we happen to be the generation that will see this happen, and it's already begun, by the way.
Now, the 3,600-year cycle, the first time I heard about Planet X was Zecharia Sitchin. Are his translations accurate?
I give a lot of credibility to to Zechariah's writings, and there's one. He don't know how many DVDs he did, but there's one that I've got a copy of. I probably still have it for sale on my website. I don't have any in inventory. Smoking gun evidence, as we say in the criminal world, criminal defense world. The title of the video is "Are We Alone in the Universe?" And there's about a 12-minute interview on there with Zecharia Sitchin and Dr. Robert Harrington in the same room at the same time at the U.S. Naval Observatory headquarters in Washington, D.C. Phenomenal interview. Dr. Harrington, of course, was the supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory, and Harrington and Sitchin are talking, and Harrington is very complimentary of Sitchin's work, and he shows he draws out on a whiteboard the orbit of Planet X, and he says, Zecharia, this is almost exactly the same orbit that you got from the Babylonian clay tablets. And then Harrington goes on to describe the 10th planet, its size, 5 to 7 times the size of Earth, having a far larger iron-nickel core, and so forth. So yes, I give a lot of credibility to Sitchin. I know there's people who don't do that, but I personally do give Mr. Sitchin a lot of credit. Now, there was actually about 1 hour of that video interview that since Mr. Sitchin died, that 1 hour, I've talked to the producer out in California, and he says, John, I don't know we'll ever get to see it publicly because there's these legal battles between the heirs of Zecharia Sitchin over who has ownership of the copyright. But that 10 or 12 minutes on that one video by itself is very powerful.
Now, didn't that Mr. Richards gentleman die shortly after that? Some people say he was taken out.
Robert Harrington announced he was going to pack up equipment, go to the Antarctic, and look at the 10th planet on his own, which he did. Not long after that, he died allegedly from a very fast-acting form of cancer that between the time he was diagnosed and the time he was dead was about 90 days. That's the story. And there's a lot of people, myself included, are very skeptical of that story. I kind of jokingly or flippantly say sometimes that Dr. Harrington didn't get the memo. Don't talk about this thing, because people from NASA got the memo. They no longer talk about it.
Okay, now this 90-day cancer thing, and you say you're kind of not really sure if you agree with that. So do you think that maybe he had it long before, possibly, and it was just something he hadn't talked about? He was kind of getting close to the end, and then the internet spinned it and made it look like a giant conspiracy when it's not, or...
Well, of course, there was no internet except for military
True.
Back then in the late 1980s. But when you see Dr. Harrington in the video, he looks like he could be a linebacker for the NFL. This is a big, healthy, tough-looking guy. So I'm very skeptical. There are ways that you could induce cancer by having somebody ingest radioactive material, for example, that would be fast acting. And other than that, it's just speculation. I'm not sure what purpose it serves, but there is kind of an interesting twist to it, Rex. Dr. Harrington's assistant researcher, his second in command, I guess you could say, made a public statement after Dr. Harrington died that he was no longer searching for Planet X himself.
Somebody had a little conversation with him, maybe.
Yeah, basically. Would you like to have another birthday, young man? Yeah, right.
Now, with that being said, if Zecharia Sitchin was spot on or very close to spot on with many of these orbits and translations, then maybe the Anunnaki could be real as well.
Possibly. Something I've confirmed multiple times through multiple private trusted sources is that the UFO issue is not well understood at all by the general public. Even at these conferences, they like to have fuzzy photographs of Frisbees in people's backyards. The real deal is about 20,000 miles over your head there, Rex, with satellites. And it shocked many of us researchers. This past January, Pepsi-Cola Company came out with this Black Knight satellite video, which very slick, very Hollywood production, talking about the Black Knight satellite, which I've been aware of for, oh my goodness, this is 2016, probably about 12 years or so.
Can you tell our listeners what you know about that satellite? That's fascinating.
It's just the beginning of what I'll tell you. But here's a beginning point. Late 1950s, we sent our first satellite up about the size of a, I'm trying to not get confused here. The Russian satellite and the American satellite, one was the size of a grapefruit, the other the size of a basketball, the American and Russian satellites. It really doesn't matter which one was which. At that point, we set up something we never needed previously, optical and radar tracking stations. That had never been done before because there was no need to. So I set those up, and let's imagine, Rex, I'm going to put you on the hot spot here. Imagine, Rex, that you're a 30-year-old Air Force captain, and you're the duty officer in the White House Situation Room from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And something comes up, and you've got to decide whether or not you go to the living quarters and wake up a 5-star general who happens to be commander-in-chief. Would it be career-enhancing, Rex, to do that if it wasn't really, really important at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Of course not. Of
course not. But you do it anyway because your general has told you you need to wake up the commander-in-chief. Mr. President, we need you in the Situation Room. They found the Black Knight satellite with these optical and radar tracking stations. It's about 22,000 miles up, just below the Van Allen radiation belt. It took me years. It took me more than 10 years to find out the third dimension. 20 feet by 40 feet by 70 feet. It is really, really big. I found out its other nickname. The Black Knight satellite is the nickname most people know. The other nickname within the intelligence services is the following. The chirogenic box. Fascinating. Chirogenics, of course, refers to absolute zero. At that point in time, it became a matter of highest national security and highest national priority to gain access to that technology inside that several thousand square feet of space inside that box. And I still have not confirmed that we have or have not. I know some of these satellites, and you're about to find out more here, some of these satellites, and possibly even the Black Knight, the closer you get to it physically, the stronger the electromagnetic field gets, the closer you get, which is a defensive mechanism. And my understanding is close enough, strong enough to harm human beings if you get too close to it.
I guess force field, essentially.
Basically, to use Star Wars technology, but there's a high likelihood that all the money spent on the Apollo space missions was a cover story to spend the money to get that high and gain access to that technology. I don't believe human beings have set foot on the moon in recent times. They may have in ancient times, but not in recent times. The Black Knight satellite is believed to be about 12,000 years old, Rex. Now, here's where it gets better. Two private sources, actually three. One is a U.S. senator from a state I won't mention. Another, a former intelligence analyst, just like myself. And a third person was at one of my presentations in Springfield, Missouri, a gentleman who works in the satellite industry. There's many more satellites orbiting Earth right now that we modern earthbound human beings did not put up there. Some equally as old as the Black Knight satellite, 12,000 years old. Others, very, very recent satellites that we earthbound human beings did not put up there. Now, the former intelligence analyst, he said he got his briefing at Langley, Virginia, at CIA headquarters. The man who works for the satellite industry, this is fascinating. I'm doing this presentation, Rex, in Springfield to a group of Messianic Jews. And when I get to the Black Knight satellite, he starts smiling and nodding his head, and smiling and nodding his head. The front row, left side. So finally I said, "Sir, what agency are you with?" He says, "John, I'm not with an agency. I'm in the satellite industry." Think about it. You're going to shoot something up there that's worth $10 or $20 million. It's not optional. You have to know everything that's up there, its size, its trajectory, its speed. It is not optional. Everything up there is very carefully mapped and very well known. And we know, it's common knowledge within the satellite industry, that there's many, many satellites up there that modern earthbound human beings did not place up there. Common as knowing yesterday's baseball scores, Rex.
With that said, do some of these satellites, you feel, could they possibly have, you said cryogenic, so I'm thinking of mummified bodies in there, or these ETs that have been sleeping now for 10,000 years, just waiting to wake up and go feed off of the humans or something. I don't know, man, but it's pretty intense, you know?
Well, it is. But you don't necessarily need to go down the ET road. These could be our ancestors. We know, and it's well established, and even in traditional archaeology taught in schools, that our ancestors had high levels of technology in the ancient past. The Mayans were doing mathematical calculations to 10 decimal points. There's still no consensus on how the Great Pyramid at Giza was built. From what my knowledge, I think it may have been a form of concrete. But we're now finding pyramids all over all over the planet. A pyramid more than times the size of the Great Pyramid at Giza was found in Bosnia, I think about 6 years ago. It's still the pyramid in Bosnia is still the second tallest human-built structure on the planet, and mainstream archaeologists were trying to deny for a number of years that it was anything other than a really big hill. But the archaeologists, I think this year, summer of 2016, I believe is only the fourth or fifth summer that they've had digs there at the what they call the Valley of the Pyramids in Bosnia, including this period more than twice the size of the one at Giza. But it is still that pyramid in Bosnia is the second tallest human-built structure on the planet, the first being the hotel in Dubai. And Europe is not exactly the middle of Borneo or New Guinea or deepest, darkest Amazon. It's in the middle of Central Europe, which has had universities open every working day for centuries. Not exactly a primitive place. The locals all thought it was a really, really big hill. It has 8 to 10 feet of dirt over it, and grass and trees and shrubs. And from the ground, that's probably what it looks. But from the air, you can see it's a perfectly shaped pyramid.
Yeah, I saw some images from Antarctica the other day, actually, that my friend Jason sent me. Oh, you talked to Jason earlier today, and that image was from Antarctica, and it looked like a pyramid. And I've seen structures on the moon. I think those were debunked, actually, but the ones on Mars that I saw by that what looked like the old face from the Viking orbiter satellite that was shot out, I think, in 1974 or 76. It seems as if pyramids are all over the place, kind of the universal
they are.
shape.
They
so
are.
yeah, and so let's talk about the possibility of these secret space programs or people that, thousands and thousands of years ago, our ancestors being much more highly advanced. Have you ever seen images of some of the, what looks like ancient artifacts and architecture on different planets?
I don't focus on that so much, and I'm aware of these images, and I have seen some of these images. But there's enough fascinating stuff right here. Take Google Earth, for example, and the Antarctic. When you start zooming over, it's almost like being in an airplane. It's kind of fun. Zooming over the Antarctic with Google Earth, you'll find that certain parts of the Antarctic are simply blocked out. They are. They're blocked out.
Right.
Same thing right off the east coast of the United States, or off the coast of Georgia and South Carolina, what they call the continental shelf. Areas of that are blocked out as well. And there's fascinating things that aren't blocked out in the Caribbean. Clearly, structures with right angles, and right angles don't occur in nature. They simply don't. So there's plenty of things to look at right here on Earth that people can observe and make note of. And quite a few good books I've got in my private library, about 10 or 12 of these books that deal with forbidden archaeology or hidden archaeology or out-of-place artifacts, as they're sometimes called. It's a whole fascinating area of study, all of which leads us to two conclusions. First of all, that our ancestors have been on this planet a really, really long time, probably 1 million plus years, and that our ancestors also had access to technology. I'll give you an example that's in all your grocery stores that you can find. There's a grain called spelt, and there's spelt bread in many grocery stores these days. S-P-E-L-T, spelt. As it turns out, and of course we couldn't determine this, our best scientists didn't even know how to do this, but they figured out about 30 or 40 years ago that the grain spelt, which has been grown the same way for more than 6,000 years, is a genetically modified organism. How about that? Plus, it's highly radioactive resistant. So this grain, spelt, which has been grown in certain parts of the world that we know of for at least 6,000 years, is a genetically modified organism, which means whoever did that, which I believe was our ancestors, could do things 6,000 years ago that we could not do 50 years ago. We couldn't create a genetically modified organism 50 years ago. We didn't have that technology. Moving on from there, Rex, if you go to the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, you'll find hundreds of acres covered with green glass. Green glass. And the only way that can happen is to get the heat of the sun at the surface of the planet. There is no other way. We didn't know until August of 1945 how that can happen. We found out twice in August 1945 how to get the heat of the sun at the surface of the planet. And it's the nuclear devices being set off. Same thing in Pakistan. One of my neighbors, a retired petroleum engineer, been all over the planet in his career. I asked him one time when we were having coffee, you ever been to Kashmir where the really nice wool comes from in Pakistan? He says, oh yeah, John, my wife and I went there on vacation. I asked him, are you aware that nuclear devices were set off there about 12,000 years ago? He says, oh yeah, John, they sell trinkets in the local souvenir shops commemorating the nuclear devices set off in Kashmir, Pakistan, 12,000 years ago. And
wow.
I'm just touching on, this is just tip of the iceberg, just a tip of the iceberg. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples of artifacts that have been located, artifacts that cannot be explained. There is a stone, a cut stone in Lebanon that's about the size of 2 or 3 city transit buses. Then you see people lined up on this thing. And it's a cut stone. It was cut in the quarry and never moved. Or no, it was cut and had been moved, excuse me. And we still don't know how it was moved because we don't have the ability even now to move one stone that large with the heavy industrial equipment that we have. And multiple other examples. of our ancestors doing things that we can't duplicate. With all the technology, all the heavy equipment, all the engineering we've got, we cannot duplicate it. Are you aware of the ancient tunnels in Arizona?
Oh, no. Tell me about those. I might have to go out there.
Well, there was a explorer on the north rim of the Grand Canyon shortly after 1900. He stumbled upon the man-made tunnels. There was an article published in the local Arizona newspaper talking about the tunnels and the Egyptian artifacts, ancient Egyptian artifacts have been found in there. And the last part of the newspaper article says the Smithsonian had been called in, and of course we never heard anything about it again publicly. Now, the north rim of the Grand Canyon is off limits. If you attempt to go there, Rex, you will be arrested. You will be arrested. So I would not suggest that. Another, the same intelligence analyst, the same intelligence analyst I was talking about earlier, he was with 99 other men. It was 100 men split up into two 52-man teams. They gained entrance to the tunnels at Hoover Dam. Now, Hoover Dam is about 50 miles. It's a crow flash from the north rim of the Grand Canyon. They had ATVs, cameras, various engineering and surveying equipment to measure and photograph those tunnels for a day. So you got 50 men, 100 men, 50 ATVs, and all this surveying and engineering equipment in these tunnels for a full day. His job, his specific job, was to measure and photograph the boreholes, which would be about the right size for modern fiber optics, about 2.5, 3 inches in diameter, boreholes that are in these ancient tunnels that go on for miles and miles and miles between the north rim of the Grand Canyon and Hoover Dam in Arizona. Jeez. How about that?
I mean, those are some amazing parts. I do remember reading an article, I think it was on Crystal Links or something like that a few years ago, that talked about stuff that was found in this cave in the Grand Canyon. But there weren't links like what you're referring in specific details. Those aren't
caves. These aren't caves. These are man-made tunnels.
Wow.
These are not caves. These are man-made tunnels.
Okay. Now, also, didn't they find in 1924, I think it was, in Los Angeles or somewhere in California, just enormous caverns and catacombs that were thousands of years old? I think it even came out in the LA Times, and then nothing about it after that.
I'm not familiar with that, but I'm certainly going to look into it. My friend Professor McKinney, who's on my radio show every Wednesday, he says, John, only 5% of what there is to be found has been found when it comes to what remains to be found for archaeological purposes. In fact, Professor McKinney was down at the Nazca lines in Peru about a year ago, and he's an amateur archaeologist himself, and he determined that the Nazca lines, which are pretty well known, have been written about and a number of books. That's these images of birds and animals and what appear to be people on these plains of the Nazca Plains that you can't tell what they are until you get 2,000 to 5,000 feet above the ground. He determined to his own satisfaction that they're actually very sophisticated antennas for radio frequency engineering. In fact, I think I may have his book here at my elbow if I can grab it real quick.
Great.
Let me see if I can grab it.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about those just the other day. I'm glad you brought them up.
No, this is somebody else's book. This is Max Egan's book, or Max Egan, I think is how he says it.
Yeah, Max, great guy.
Yeah, he is. He does a lot of good work too. Well, here's another one of McKinney's books here. This may be the wing generator. Yeah, that's the wing generator. Never mind.
Okay, no problem.
All right, let's see. One more book. Here it is.
Bingo.
He doesn't get into a snappy title. Here's the title. The Nazca and Palpa Lines, Peru. The Mystery Solved. Ancient Interferometer Fractal Antenna Complex. So that's what he says these are. And that's part of his professional training and his professional expertise. And I'm going to say the name of these antennas again. Interferometer Fractal Antenna Complex. Professor McKinney claims that these antennas could be used for both transmitting and receiving certain messages. using radio frequency technology.
That's incredible. I hadn't heard that before, but how fantastic is that? What people see as just a really cool picture on a cliff top, essentially, or on a mesa or something like that. Then you go 5,000 feet up, you can see these really cool images, but it's even more than that, it sounds like. That's incredible. How do they even find that out? That's what I want to know.
Well, this is Professor McCanney's unique work that he did on his own, and it's a combination of expertise coming together that typically doesn't happen. Your typical archaeologist does not have the skills of a radio frequency engineer.
Right.
They don't. I mean, that's just not the world they live in. So it's something that they, despite being well educated and well trained and well versed in their area of expertise, if you don't know it, you don't know it. But Professor McCanney is well versed, and he's done radio frequency engineering and radio frequency engineering of antennas. So when he talks about an interferometer fractal antenna, he's speaking from his professional knowledge that he did as part of his career.
Wow, that's cool. That really is. And I'd recommend our listeners, if you'd like to know more about John or listen to his radio program, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I had a chance to be on there this morning. It's at republicbroadcasting.org/The John Moore Show. You can also find him on YouTube, youtube.com/user/JRLiberty. And you're on Facebook now a little bit more than you want to be, obviously, because of the sign of the times, but people can access you there as well. And what I was hoping we could do to close out tonight, John, is the last part of the show. We're at a very pivotal time, I feel, with the elections coming up here, and I think that all the politicians are pretty much actors. I mean, that's what my gut tells me. They're just
you have to have those skills to even be a politician at that level.
Well said. Yeah, touche. But it kind of seems as if they'll go on record and say one thing, and behind the scenes they're doing the exact opposite. You know,
I was a house guest of a campaign manager for 3 different presidential campaigns last August, and a couple of her advisors were there, and they talked openly about the things that you're mentioning and how these politicians, and Donald Trump is a good example. In public, he speaks at a 3rd grade level. In private, he speaks at his normal level of intelligence and training and education at a far level higher. And being able to segue back and forth is a skill if you're going to be appealing to the general public. You need to have that skill.
Absolutely. And many of the people that are good at, entertainment or media, they've got just that natural ability to entertain people, and that is important. Yet I wonder if they, the Republican, Democrat, if they're both really playing the same game, just different sides of the coin. Do you think that Trump is going to make it in office, or do you think it's going to be Hillary? And if so, either way, do you think that that's going to have implications on possible much stricter gun control regulations?
Well, if Hillary gets elected, we can say goodbye to our Second Amendment rights, in my opinion. I truly hope and pray that Donald Trump gets elected. I don't have a crystal ball. And if it's a free and fair election without too much vote fraud, I think he will, in fact, get elected.
Okay, and I feel that he's really got the momentum right now. Yet I've just often wondered, even with that momentum and backing of the public, does it really matter? Or is there just so much voter fraud and behind-the-scenes influence that it doesn't really matter about the popular vote anyway? So you do feel that our vote that actually does make a difference, John?
It makes a statement as much as anything else. I think it's going to the poll and voting is a statement in and of itself that you care, that you want to make a difference. And especially important for electing a patriotic, Constitution-believing sheriff. That's incredibly important to do that.
Okay, absolutely. And just one last question before we close out tonight. I heard from an inside source that there could be martial law declared here within the next 30 days. Have you heard any chitter-chatter about that?
No 30-day time frame. A lot would have to happen in a very short period of time for that to take place. but I have no knowledge of what you just said. No.
Well, that's good to hear. That's absolutely great news. John, I really appreciate you coming on the show this year at the Leak Project, and I hope that you continue to do well with Republic Broadcasting. And if there's anything we can ever do to help out, please feel free to let us know. Appreciate everything.
Thank you, Rex. It was good, and I thank you very much. So,
absolutely.
have a good evening. Okay.